Hey, welcome to the Ethics Experts. If it's your first time joining us, welcome. And if you're a returning subscriber, hey, bestie, hope you're having an amazing day. See what happens when you subscribe? You get a bonus greeting on every episode. On this episode, we talked to Julie Winkle Giulioni, who wrote the book, Help Them Grow or Watch Them Go. Third edition is coming out in a couple weeks. It's a phenomenal conversation. She has some really great frameworks for how an organization can really build a learning culture to drive more engagement, drive lower turnover, and just all those other positive externalities. So hope you enjoy.
Welcome to the Ethics Experts, where we're elevating ethics and compliance and HR to the strategic level it's supposed to be.
So you wrote a really cool book, and it's on a topic that I think doesn't get enough attention. I think a lot of people kind of pay lip service to it. A lot of organizations pay lip service to it, but kind of when it comes down to it, the actions don't really follow those words, you know? So maybe tell us a little bit about the book and, you know, what prompted you to write it? What gap do you feel like that's going to help fill in the marketplace?
Yep, absolutely. So the book is Help Them Grow or Watch Them Go. And we wrote the first edition back in 2012. We updated it in 2019. And so this is the third edition of it. And to be honest with you, when we wrote it initially, we saw, a huge need in the marketplace. Leaders who wanted to do the right thing in terms of development, but maybe didn't have the skills or were battling, challenges around, time and maybe a scarcity mentality that was getting in the way of them doing that. And so as we looked at updating the content this time, the challenge still exists. What's different is the context is even more of a pressure cooker, even more of a needs-filled sort of environment where employees absolutely crave, demand development today. We know that one of the top reasons people leave, stay, join an organization, it has to do with the growth that they're going to enjoy. And so that at its core is really what's behind Help Them Grow or Watch Them Go.
So, what it sounds like you're saying is that from 2012, you saw it to be an issue. 2019, now you did the third edition. It feels like this issue is bigger. You use the word pressure cooker, meaning like this is, you were a little bit ahead of the curve, but also maybe not enough people read the book because the actions aren't sort of following it yet.
That's exactly right. In fact, this latest edition of the book, the subtitle originally was Career Conversations Organizations Need and Employees Want. The updated version is Career Conversations Organizations Need and Employees Still Want, because you're absolutely right. The message has not gotten through. And when I think about the pressure cooker, what I'm really thinking about are the stakes associated with developing or, actually not developing people today. There are enormous consequences. We're at an 11-year low, according to Gallup, when it comes to engagement. And that's bad for individuals, it's bad for organizations, and it's contributing to the kind of unwanted turnover that organizations absolutely don't need today.
So what do you think is prompting this increased demand for development from the organization that employees work at?
Yeah, so I think that the increased desire, need, pressure to develop is actually coming from both sides. So organizations recognize that to remain viable, to be able to sustainably supply the services and the goods that they need to be successful, they've got to make sure that people are as skillful as possible.
Right.
And we look around the corner at what's coming for most businesses. There are enormous skill gaps on the part of the workforce that, if not, bridged, are going to leave some really some liability on the part of the organization. So organizations are seeing that development is critical to continuing to maintain a competitive advantage in the marketplace. Individuals are reading the tea leaves right along with the executives. They're seeing those same cues in the workplace. They're seeing that the half-life of a technical skill is shrinking dramatically.
Right.
They're seeing new jobs being introduced and existing jobs being dropped off the roles. And so they recognize that if they're not continuously learning, skilling up, looking around the corner and anticipating what's next, they could find themselves in a bit of an awkward spot in terms of future-proofing their careers.
How has the whole COVID thing affected this?
Mhm.
Why don't you start with that?
Yeah, I think it's a great question, Nick. When COVID hit and we were all kind of sent to our corners to think about what we had done and had to confront, kind of our mortality, a
Yeah.
lot of people looked at their work with a new eye, that they started thinking, when I go back, if I go back,
Yeah.
it's going to be because it means something. I'm going to get, make a difference. I'm going to get more out of it in terms of a sense of a purpose and
Mhm.
accomplishment and whatnot. And so as folks then came back, I think what we're seeing is that many workers are looking for a new kind of relationship with their work. And organizations that are succeeding today are the ones who are recognizing that, who are teasing that out, who are understanding what that relationship looks like. And for many people, at its core, that kind of engagement and meaning comes from the ongoing growth.
Yeah, I think that's right. And then what's coupled with that, like you said, coming back with this new lens, looking for purpose, staring your mortality right in the face. What came along with that was kind of like an exponential increase in like labor mobility. Like the cost of changing jobs has totally fallen through the floor. When my grandfather wanted to change a job, he'd have to like move towns. You know what I mean? We can change jobs just by like swapping laptops and sitting at the same kitchen table. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So as that cost of changing has dropped through the floor at coinciding with this like reprioritization from the employee perspective, there's a big shuffle that I think we're just kind of maybe starting to just like that wave is just cresting. Like I don't feel like that's all behind us. Would you agree with that?
I would totally agree with that. And then layer on, MasterCard did some research, and by the year 2030, 40 to 50% of us will be part of the gig economy. And so it's
Wow.
not just about shifting jobs in terms of, traditional formal employment. The landscape is wide open for solopreneurs, and more of us are going to be going that route as well.
So let's kind of get like down into the tactics of it, because I'm just going to share some things from my business and some conversations I've had with around this topic. And I'd love some of your like advice or perspective on it. So on the one hand, I always want our company to be like a learning organization. I just feel like if we're not kind of training our people and giving them more opportunities to grow, then the odds are that they're going to leave. What's that old saying? Like, I'm going to botch this, but it's like, what if you don't train them and they stay versus like if you train them and they leave or something? I don't know. I botched that a little bit, but like it almost creates a disincentive to not, from an organization perspective, to not like offer that stuff. What I have been a little bit surprised by is like, if anybody has ever come to me and said, "Hey, Nick, can I take this course?" or "Hey, can I do this?" I've never said no. I mean, unless it's like a basket weaving course that I can't make any kind of argument that like, intersects with our business. I've just never said no to that. But I've been a little surprised at like the lack of requests from people. That's on the one hand. And then on the other hand, we have this quarter, we've tried to push out a bunch of like training options for people, like ancillary courses, different, speakers, stuff like that. And I haven't seen again, the demand that I would have expected,
Yeah, yeah. And kudos to you first for creating a culture that really does prioritize learning and making
Well,
those.
we're trying to.
Yeah, but you're making the opportunities available for folks. And what I'm hearing from employees more and more, even before COVID, I did some research, and managers are feeling totally time starved. They do not have, feel like in many cases they don't have the time to engage in career
Mhm.
development. Employees are feeling the same. They are just maxed out, and finding the time to grow, to invest in oneself, frequently gets pushed down the list of priorities.
Right.
And so pair that also with the reality that we are all consuming information in so many different ways today. When I was coming up in this learning and development field, it was workshops. I mean, and we went away for a week at a time and taught leaders how to lead. And over time, some of the formal mechanisms for learning have maybe taken a backseat to some of the informal ways that we're learning. And so in many organizations, what I'm seeing is that while an employee may not sign up for the training, that doesn't mean they're not committed to their growth. They are going on YouTube, they're using ChatGPT, they're doing Udemy or whatever it might be, because there are so many different ways. And so what I've seen in organizations that are really succeeding is they're taking kind of a multimodal approach to learning.
Okay.
They're making those formal mechanisms available. And I make my living, doing training. So please know I am totally supportive of that. But it's just one piece of the overall puzzle. And so what are the other pieces that we can put in place that allow people to learn organically and maybe on a pull rather than a push basis to better fit the cadence of a typical employee's life?
So tell me a little bit about, like, you mentioned the formal versus the informal and the push versus pull. Can you help me understand like what those different ends of the spectrum might look like?
Yeah. And I like, I've never thought of it as a spectrum, Nick, but I think you really nailed it, because on the one end of the continuum, we've got the formal, organized by the organization, training events, right? That again, offer tremendous value to folks. The challenge is they're not always available. They're not always available to the people who might want or need them. And they're not always available when someone needs it. So it's a more of that event-based thing. Then as we move along the continuum, we've got activities related to like coaching and mentoring and job shadowing, more of the exposure stuff. And then on the far end of the continuum, we've got, and I don't want to make it sound like it's far out by any stretch, but on the other end of the continuum, we've got the informal stuff. We've got the event, the experiences that operate within the context of someone's job.
Okay.
So it's not that it's necessarily a workshop or an event that I'm attending, but it's a project. It's a stretch assignment. It's getting to go to a meeting with my boss and have exposure to the broader organization. It may even be, now we're getting to the far out end of the spectrum. Yeah. It may even be tapping what you do outside of the workplace for the purposes of development, using your volunteer and philanthropic stuff really strategically. So, you're not just a board member who's attending a meeting, but rather you're taking on a project that requires you to learn about budgeting or influence or whatever it might be. And while all of these activities along the spectrum or the continuum are valuable and add value from a learning standpoint, the advantage, if you will, of the end of the continuum that's more experience-based is it's always available, just in time, just for me. And that stuff is within the sphere of influence of a manager and an employee to affect. Whereas I might not be eligible for this course, or that coach might not be available to me, I can always craft some meaningful experience within the context of my work to keep me growing.
Yeah. And if I think back on my own career, I feel like most of my learning has probably been on that end of the spectrum, that informal stuff. I can probably think back to a handful of courses or workshops I went to that were really impactful, but it was really more that day-to-day working with my manager and seeing how he looked at an analysis or how, he pitched a certain thing that I was able to absorb. And I think those had maybe a bigger influence on the business person I am today. How do we compensate? But to have that, it's management in the halls, bumping into each other in the halls and hey, stopping by my boss's desk and saying, hey, let's, getting his feedback on an analysis. To your point, it's definitionally informal. We're now in a disproportionately more kind of work from home environment where it takes a lot more of intentionality to have those interactions. So how can an organization or how can a leader help ensure that they are creating space for those informal things in kind of a work from home, everybody kind of all over the place type environment?
Wow, great question. And in fact, that's kind of the question that informed a whole new chapter in this third edition of Help Them Grow or Watch Them Go. One of the big changes over the last 5 years is the number of people who are working remotely and in a hybrid set of circumstances. And what we know is that managers who are struggling to do career development with people who were co-located, you throw people to, the four corners of the world, and that just becomes an exponentially more complex sort of task for those folks.
Right.
And so we decided that what we really needed to do in this new edition was to speak to that context. And we interviewed 25 different thought leaders and practitioners who we believed had really cracked the code around this notion of developing at a distance. And I was so excited to kind of amass a laundry list of, 85 different things that leaders could do to make this effective. There were not any of those silver bullet activities. The common thread among all of our interviews was exactly what you said, intentionality.
Right.
It's about doing what we know works for those who are co-located and bringing more intentionality to it. And so, as we looked at that, what that means is really starting to recognize where those informal intersections happen for those who are co-located. And then you have to orchestrate the organic for those who aren't co-located. So understanding that you've got those little kind of moments where you cross paths and a learning spark occurs, how do you recreate that using, Teams or Slack, or even as something as simple as taking your one-on-one that you're probably going to have with folks anyway, and front loading that with 5 minutes of development. What are you learning? Right. What have you taken away? Here's what I'm learning. To really prioritize that. And then the other thing is there are so many context cues in the work environment. You think about like when you're all together in a meeting room and there's a meeting going on, there's all sorts of stuff that you're seeing, the eye contact between these two people, or the clearing of the throat, or the pausing and moving back from the table when it comes time to do something. The people who aren't there don't get to see. And so part of it is, how do you almost narrate some of the invisible curriculum that operates in a co-located environment so that leaders can even that playing field and not, buy into the proximity bias that will affect the organization and we already know affects the individual.
And so how could they do that? How would someone do that? I mean, you're kind of talking about bridging from something that's in person, or like the body language thing. How do they bridge that and make sure that they at least have a chance to like inject that in the minds of somebody who's not in the room?
Yeah. What that means is, as a leader, being conscious of the fact you've got people who didn't see some of that stuff. And even just having a slip of paper at the side of your desk, or a note on your computer where you're keeping track of those kinds of things that have happened that your remote team or your hybrid team needs to know, so that the next time you connect, and if it's important enough, you proactively reach out. But if you kind of catalog those things, the next time you can connect, you can say, hey, what was your impression of that meeting? Did you pick up on anything? Let me tell you what I saw from my vantage point and what that might mean. And in that way, we're able to let people in on some of that undercurrent stuff, educate them in terms of what's going on in the business, and then together create paths forward, ways to address it, whatever it might be within the context of that particular situation.
So I think that's a great example. I think that's a great kind of methodology. As you were talking about intentionality, I was just kind of reflecting on like, this is really like a culture thing. This is just like a forward, a culture is nothing other than like a forward pressure towards some ideal, and I think if it's a learning culture and there's a tone from the top, that at least kind of, maybe I'm kind of brainstorming here, but like that perhaps creates like the circumstances for like growth to happen. But I think that has to probably translate down to an individual manager level, because that individual manager has a disproportionate influence on like the work experience for a particular like employee, definitely relative to like the tone at the top, whoever that executive is.
Yeah.
So how would an organization that, let's say, they're all about this, they've read the book, they know, hey, if I don't make it, if I don't help folks grow, they will go. That's sort of like embedded in the minds of like leaders. How do leaders sell that sort of long-term focus to a manager who might be overloaded or not hitting their numbers or whatever, like as those pressures come, we just tend to, in my experience, we tend to shift from like a longer term focus that's maybe more rational to the shorter term kind of reactionary focus where there's just like, it feels like there's no time for these like nice to have things. So how do we embed that? Like, how do we sell those local managers that like, no, this is super important and you have to carve that time out because it's like, if you don't keep your body healthy, then you'll die young or whatever. You know what I mean? It's that kind of a relationship.
Yeah, yeah. And I think, what you've laid out here is it's a pay now or pay later, but you're going to pay.
Yeah, right.
And when do you choose to make that investment? On the front end, where you're going to see some returns, or on the back end, when you see talent walk out the door, and now you're scrambling to recruit and interview and hire and onboard new folks. But the other thing is the time question. When we originally wrote the first edition of Help Them Grow, we did some research because we saw the compelling business case and human case. Organizations need it. People want it. It wasn't happening. Why? And so the research found 3-to-1 that the greatest challenge that managers and leaders faced when it came to career development was time. And, can't argue with that. But if we keep thinking about career development as a discrete activity that needs to be put on the calendar or on our to-do list,
okay,
it's going to fall to the bottom. So what the book does and what our real philosophy speaks to is career development is a relationship that plays out through conversation. You're having conversations with people anyway. How can you take those envelopes of time when you're going to engage and add some career development focus, just wring a little bit more value out of those exchanges. And the way effective leaders do that is by finding those cues in the environment. Somebody says, "Oh my gosh, that was such a fun project."
Right.
And a regular leader would say, "Oh, that's great. So glad you enjoyed it." But somebody who's strategic about this would say, say a little bit more. What did you enjoy about that? Which of your skills were most important to making that such a joyful experience? So that over time, you don't have to have that full 1-hour conversation, but over time, this thread of conversation layers information and context and builds the kind of understanding that leads toward the motivation, being able to help people to really grow.
I love how you put that development is a relationship. If, it's kind of this interesting kind of dichotomy, I guess. People don't seem to have trouble developing their children, right? Like you're constantly developing them. Every opportunity, maybe I'm projecting a little bit here, but it's like every time they don't say please, every time they don't put their dishes away, you're constantly correcting those things. And it's, their development is really this accumulation of like a million like micro corrections. And so that drive is like, that drive is like wide open in that sphere of our lives. But it's like, there's definitely a different aperture on it on like the career side. Do you think it's like an ownership thing? Like I own these people, not, you know what I mean? Like these are my people and I it's incumbent on me to develop them the same way that my children are mine. And it's incumbent on me to develop them. Do you think there's like a responsibility issue that we need to like turn up a little bit more so that, leaders naturally are going to engage in this like optimizing, we're all kind of wired for optimization, like that's kind of in our DNA, and we see those opportunities for optimization on things that are ours, but it's like we're almost blind to them sometimes on like employees that are entrusted to us.
Yeah. That's, I think, a really insightful observation. I think from my perspective, what I'd say is this whole notion of who's responsible for development is a little bit muddy in many organizations. And
Great
that
point.
may be contributing to some of the ambiguity and the unevenness in terms of performance. For years, it was the organizations and the managers' role to develop people. And, managers felt like they had to put their people on their back and carry them across the finish line. And then the pendulum swung to the other side, where employees, you got to own your career. And absolutely, that's true too. It's almost like, there's validity to both ends of the continuum.
Right.
I think where folks are struggling is, where should that pendulum be? What is the right balance point? Because an individual has to own his or her own career.
Yeah, right.
Nobody cares more. Nobody knows more. Nobody's as invested. But individuals can't do it by themselves. They need to do it within the context of a supportive environment. And that, for most employees, looks like a manager or supervisor who demonstrates interest and respect for the growth of the individual and is there to support them. So while I think that there are some similarities in terms of just kind of the innate drive many effective developers have, that's similar, with your kids, it's just so joyful to see them blossom into these, wonderful human beings. Effective developers, I think, tap that same bit of DNA when it comes to their employees. But as you said, it plays out through a different aperture, a different, methodology.
A rate or something. Yeah.
Facilitative.
Yeah. And I guess there's there's also this permanence thing, right? Like your kids are your kids kind of forever. An employee might be there for 6 months or 6 years. You kind of don't know. And I think sometimes people are, they're scared to sort of pour out without knowing that it's going to come back to them. You know what I mean? Yep. You mentioned earlier kind of like this fixed mindset that an organization has, that organizations might have that like prevent them from really engaging and pouring into, their employee base. Talk to me a little bit about like that fixed versus growth mindset and how you see that play out either on the organizational side and maybe, how we can, how someone who's maybe listening to this, who's, clapping and they're loving this and they're clicking the like button, how can they help, their leaders who might be inadvertently in that sort of a fixed mindset start to open up to this growth mindset that says, hey, if we don't help them grow, they're going to go. I mean, that's kind of the point,
Yeah. So the way I internalize this fixed versus growth mindset relative to this topic is with regard to a leader's willingness to generously invest in the development of others without necessarily a guarantee that that's going to be returned by that person directly.
Mm-hmm.
And what we see so frequently, well, it just plays out in so many different ways. As you said, managers thinking, they're not 10 years or short, they're not going to be with us that long. Who cares? Right. Or managers, as you alluded to before, who are thinking, wow, do I really want to develop this person, make them more attractive to be grabbed, and snatched down the highway or down the hallway even? Maybe it's better to just not rock the boat and keep everybody small. So I think, it plays out in a couple of different ways. And then the other way is, this whole notion of talent hoarding, which is such a scarcity mentality where it's almost the other end of the responsibility continuum where these are my people and you're not going to take them. This is my talent that I've developed. When in reality, and in fact, in the new edition, we speak to this notion, talent really needs to be viewed as an enterprise-wide resource. Because, clearly, if I invest in the development of someone, it would be great if it came back to me directly. But what if, wouldn't you rather have somebody go down to another department in your own organization? Or, even out to the competition. It's really interesting. I've told this story a few times. There's a client of mine in financial services a senior executive who put together this amazing development program, brought in great talent, developed these leaders, but their pay structure was such that it was hard to keep them. And so a lot of these folks would get skilled up and be grabbed by competitors. Despite all of this, this hemorrhaging of talent, this guy was so cheerful about the whole situation. And so I finally said, John, you got to let me in on what's going on here. How are you continuing to invest like this while you see talent leave? And he said, yeah, it really bums me out, when I see that happen. But what I'm recognizing is that in the process of creating skillful executives who go elsewhere, I'm building this network of collaborators. And he talked about a project that had come to them. His organization couldn't have done it alone. His mentees organization couldn't have done it alone. They came together and closed an enormous deal. And he said, I couldn't have done that with anyone else. I couldn't have done it with someone who I didn't know had the skills, didn't know would have the skills or the loyalty, and the ethics to be able to make that happen. And so I think a lot of us as leaders, we need to think a lot more broadly about talent and the development of it, supporting ourselves, our organization, the industry that we're in, and moving that forward, as well as, of course, then the individual.
Do you think commitment to development should be influenced at all by like profit margin of the industry?
Say more about that, Nick.
So I'm just thinking about like investment banking or financial services. I came out of KPMG. That was my first job. And those companies are like revolving doors. You know what I'm saying? Guys go in there for a couple of years, 2-3 years, you get your CPA, you get a CFA, you get your, I don't know, whatever you have to get for investment banking, Series 7 or whatever it is. And then those guys, very like a tiny fraction of those folks end up staying beyond, like the curve is like, it's like that.
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying? It's like, 2% of people will stay 5 years or 10 years or something like that. But those industries typically have really high profit margins. Okay. Like, does that make it easier for an organization to say, yeah, whatever, if these guys leave, it's fine. The profit is there. And should that be any indicator, or should that be any kind of a factor in the equation that like results in the level of, learning you're willing to sort of pour into your people?
Well, to me, budget doesn't matter. Margins don't matter, because if we redefine career development as this kind of a relationship, and if leaders become skillful at stealthily just slipping it into the workflow, there's no bottom line implication associated with that, except for on the other side of it. So someone who goes through KPMG, learns a lot, has a great experience, and then goes out into industry. I know you all have a wonderful alumni association,
right,
that supports one another and supports the KPMG. When you have a consulting need, I bet you KPMG is right at the top of your list. And so, that's where I think we need to focus, is not on the cost associated with developing those people, but on the benefits that we're going to reap by having skillful folks who feel great about the organization out in the marketplace.
Yeah, I think that's spot on. I agree with that 100%. It should not, in my mind, be influenced at all by that. It should just be a way of doing business. And yeah, so oh man, I was going to say something really brilliant. You're going to like this. But in that kind of a culture, that kind of a learning culture, kind of to your point, this is what I was going to say. You were talking about a relationship. And I think the old way of thinking was that, a business is a supplier of, jobs. And, it just seemed like a lot more of a one-way street. I think there's been a leveling of the playing field in terms of like the market of jobs, where there's a supply of labor and a supply, and a supply of jobs. And I think, if you just think of what you're kind of talking about is like an unfettered pouring out into your people and not keeping a balance sheet involved, right? And if I think of like relationships that I have, personal relationships, balance sheet relationships seem so inauthentic. They're so hard to truly engage with, where it feels like you're like keeping track of. Have you ever had a relationship like that, where it's like there seems to be a balance sheet, and then you have these other relationships where it's like there's no balance sheet. We're in this together. It feels so much more authentic. It feels so much more real, and so forth. And I think when organizations kind of get too transactional with their relationship with their employees, they end up, when they're so transactional, it ends up leading to an inauthentic relationship. It ends up leading to a lower level of engagement. And so like philosophically, from my standpoint, I feel like it's our job to like keep people, and we have to create an environment that they want to stay in, because they have 1,000 options, and they can get a job in California, or they can get a job in Florida or whatever without even moving. You know what I mean? So I think when an organization, I just kind of want your reaction to this, but like when an organization can like embrace that, hey, this is a two-way street, and it's not like everyone's like, they're lucky to work here. It's like, well, I'm also lucky to have them. Like it's a market. These lines are crossing, and we need to maintain that kind of on both ends, from their performance and then from our compensation, which can come in dollars or it can come in training or new opportunities, whatever. I think that's a much kind of more authentic kind of framework for authentic engagement. And it's also like a little bit more freeing because you're not like caught off guard so much. And I mean, I think it's so unrealistic in today's day and age that, like people don't stay at companies for 30 years like our grandfathers did. You know what I'm saying? So like, they're just going to be here for a little while. I want people to look back on their time here as a place that fed them, that created perhaps opportunities for them that they can look back in fondness at. And what I found is that as we've employed that philosophy, we've gotten a lot of the positive externalities that like you've talked about. It's like our turnover rate is relatively lower than others in our industry. As a result, our engagement rate is higher, our margins are higher, and like all those positive externalities that I can't like point to and like do an attribution analysis and say like this effort led to that piece, this effort led to that piece. It's just kind of a general kind of vibe. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. And the notion of the two-way street is right on. I mean, that kind of reciprocity is what's required for sustainable success for the individual and for the organization. If the balance falls too much on one side or the other, that's definitely not sustainable. The balance sheet notion, the reality is organizations have limited funds. And, so the balance sheet notion in terms of what we can provide in terms of formal development, that's fair. I mean, there are only so many dollars to spread around. Where I think we can, as leaders and organizations, be incredibly generous and invest generously in those around us is on the informal side of the equation. So on that ongoing conversation, on the experiences, on the mentoring and the coaching and the feedback that helps people see, hey, they're really investing in me. They care. They want me to succeed. The other thing is, as you talked about shorter and shorter tenures, that to me is an invitation to leaders and organizations to get really good at developing people faster. So it's not an argument for, okay, they're going to leave, let's not bother. It's how quickly can we develop them so that while they're here, we reap those benefits and then they'll take them and use them somewhere else.
Yeah. And I think that's a great idea. That's a great framework, because if you do that right out of the gate, you're sort of setting that impression, you're setting the kind of the terms of that relationship. And, when someone joins an organization, they go through this whole path, right? Like they're looking on Glassdoor, they're talking to friends, they're looking at the website, they start to meet a couple of people during the interview process, then they come on board and you're trying to figure out like what's real, what's not real. Is this a good bet for my career and all that kind of stuff? I think an organization can make a really good impression by out of the gate kind of pouring into folks to achieve what you're talking about, to say, man, I got to get these guys developed as fast as possible because we got a burning wick. But then the countervailing force on the employee side is like, oh, wow, this company actually cares about my development, and that might give them a little bit more runway to stay in the company.
Yeah. Oh, I love that. And when you're doing that, you framed culture in terms of pressure forward. That creates the pressure forward to create a really vibrant and authentic learning culture.
So one thing I've seen is that it's hard, there's some managers that I know that are very dedicated to growth, the growth mindset people. They're looking for these opportunities to help people. They really care. They put their money where their mouth is, so to speak, with their time and everything else. So they have that on the one hand, but then on the other hand, there's this natural human thing to say, like, I'm not going to be scattering seeds on pavement because those aren't going to grow. You know what I mean? Like, you want to plant seeds in good soil. You want to, spend your time with someone that is going to absorb it and appreciate it and so forth. Right. I think sometimes there's like this error factor where, a manager who might be well-intended is maybe dealing with an individual who is giving off signals that they're not open to it, or they're not trying to grow, or they're not trying to hear those things. What would you tell a manager, or how would you encourage a manager to like keep pouring out in the face of what might be kind of inaccurate, like read of the feedback that you're getting from that individual.
Yeah.
Does that question make sense? That was a little
Yeah.
confusing, maybe.
No, totally does. And I think what I'd say is that not growing is not an option today. There was a time when it was okay for an employee to say, "No, I'm good, thank you. Just let me keep doing my job." But my job is morphing so much every day that to not grow and learn and become more skillful is a one-way ticket to nowhere. So I think the first step on the part of leaders is really helping an employee who seems disinterested in growth understand the non-negotiable nature of that today. Because when people can wrap their heads around the fact that that staying still is falling backward, that can open up a receptivity for growth that might not have been there before. So I think there's a little bit of education, selling individuals on why growth is non-negotiable today. And it's interesting, one of the things that we heard again in our original research about why leaders don't engage in the kind of development people want is this belief that maybe I should only do it with the high potentials.
Yeah, right.
Who are most skillful, they're on a path, they're really hungry, and that's where I want to scatter my seeds. I love that. And certainly you're going to see some great rewards from that. But when you look at that massive middle, that 80% at the center of the bell curve, imagine what you could do as a department or an organization if each one of those people even put 2 more percentage points into their development.
Right.
The outcomes could be enormous. So it's not, an either or, but really a both and to keep the organization moving forward.
But to your point, there's this mental math everybody does with like their time, right? Like how you spend your time, you're making these like little bets. And, this is going to sound very stupid, but bear with me. It's like pouring into those people on the bell curve that are like your super high performers. You're going to get that like dopamine drip immediately because those people are good at that and they're good at showing that and they're good at sort of pulling that in. That's how they maybe got to the bell curve. But like arguably, given the shape of that bell curve, more of your time should be spent in that middle, because if you can turn somebody from a B to an A, that has a much bigger impact than changing a tiny group of A's to A pluses.
Yeah, couldn't agree more. It makes an enormous difference to individuals, to your department, and to the organization as a whole. And I guess, the other thing to think about is this investment of time. Again, if you're going to define career development as these big events,
then
that investment looks different than that ongoing conversation. So it's not an incremental increase of tremendous effort, really, to provide that opportunity to dialogue around development to everybody across the board.
Which is very empowering. It's like, if you want to start affecting this topic, if you want to start changing things, to your point, it's not like, all right, I have to hire a whole learning and development team. It's really just making small tweaks at the individual interaction level. That's where the real leverage is going to come, because kind of what you described is kind of a lifestyle. Like a healthy lifestyle is not just like once a year I go to the gym for a day. It's like, no, every day I'm eating healthy and every day I'm walking and doing these little things that, to your point, stack up over time and really start to compound.
I love that lifestyle. I frequently talk about it like brushing your teeth.
Yeah, exactly.
Don't just do it really, really great one time a year and hope that
right before the dentist, right?
Yeah, that's right. You're brushing your teeth every day, just dripping. It's almost like a time release formula or a lifestyle.
So I have one more question for you, because we're getting toward the end here. What advice would you give to an employee who's at maybe a company they like, but because it's remote or because their manager's overloaded, or maybe their manager has maybe a little bit more of a fixed mindset, to use our terminology from this conversation? How can they create more opportunities for those, informal interactions where, as we said, really a ton of that development really comes from?
Yeah, so frequently managers and leaders don't engage in development because they don't know how. They just, they haven't enjoyed a lot of great development themselves. They don't know what good looks like. They don't know how. So if someone is not getting the development that they need, it's incumbent upon them to ask for it. to go ahead and be the one who brings it up, not passively wait to be a consumer of career development services from your manager or your organization, but rather to ask for what you want, to go to the manager or the supervisor and say, I'm looking around and I recognize I need to keep growing. Here are a few ideas, not, a list that's cast in concrete, but some stuff that gets the manager thinking. You go to your manager who may be overloaded or not that skillful, and you offer a sloppy copy of what your development might look like. Suddenly the pressure is off them. They're going to welcome that. You've made it that much easier for them to then begin that conversation and start moving it forward in a way that's going to be relevant and meaningful to you.
I mean, what we're kind of talking about at some level is just like a high agency approach to growth and learning, whether it's from the organization side or from the employee side. It's like, how are we going to create these opportunities to, develop people or get developed, and that takes a kind of a high agency confidence to come to your boss and say, like, here are some ideas on how I can develop. But to your point, if you're not doing that, if you're not grabbing the steering wheel of your life, then you're sitting in the passenger seat or maybe the back seat, and that car's just going to kind of go where it goes. And so back to what you were saying, it is kind of a two-way street. It is this sort of relationship, and it takes kind of things on both sides. I can't control how an employee is going to react to our culture or to my intentions. They can't control the learning opportunities that I'm willing to pay for. But I think if both have that kind of high agency growth mentality where we're trying to grow and we're trying to get better, then the odds of, those intersection points occurring at a higher rate are going to be a lot higher.
I love that, because the high agency leads to high growth, leads to high engagement, leads to high results. So there's really something in it for everyone to bring that kind of agency to the table.
Well, this was so fun. Where can people find you? Where can they find your book? Where can they find you? I'd love to add your book to our library. We give away books like Mad Men over here. But tell us where we can get in contact.
Thank you. I can be found at juliewinklegiulioni.com. I'm sure that's a mouthful, so I'm sure that'll be in the show notes.
But it is phonetic.
Yeah, it is. Yes. And so most anything you need to know, you can find there. And there's plenty of information there about pre-ordering Help Them Grow or Watch Them Go, the third edition that comes out on September 24th.
Amazing. Well, thank you so much for joining us, Julie. Until next time.